What? I've never seen this. This is the embers. Ooh, strawberries. Yeah, strawberries have lots. What's down your mind? But I mean, do we have to translate it?
I think that's a great question. To me, the answer is no. Right? Isn't there an idea that, I don't know if it's true, but there is some notion of a universal, there is something like universal about a human experience of space. Of course, we all interpret it differently, but I think the goal should not necessarily be translation, but we can't lose sight of an idea that architecture is fundamentally a service, meaning like it has some obligations to the people who it is being done for to behave particular ways. You know, it needs to like meet its obligations of organizing the space and making things easier.
We're still stuck in a moment where architecture is actually not doing the service that it's intended to do, or most of the architecture that we are currently
Well, why is it not doing? I think it's doing the service. It's providing shelter. Like, what exactly should architecture do that you said it's not doing right now?
By the end of it, it's just about like being able to decide whether you want to do something in this particular way or this particular way, and trying to make it very clear that the intentions that are behind that are purely design related, in my opinion. Because if we like start like obscuring it with narratives, this is never gonna happen, in my opinion.
I have a question though, which is what does it mean to use your language to make a decision based purely on design? Like, I think part of what we're trying to learn here is that there is an inherent politic, and I mean politic very broadly, to the nature of design. Every decision is privileging one set of ideas or another, and I think we have gone through periods in design, like in the early modernists, that was about a kind of industrial rationalizing logic that was supposed to be guiding all design impulse, which led to particular conditions. And I think this moment is grappling, looking for an anchoring point to kind of lead the underlying ethos of design, which I think we are looking to social, like broad social topics. The problem is that that is, of course, a rather amorphous target, you know?
With architecture, you automatically, it's inherently public.
Yeah.
So, I don't think it can be just a question of design. It automatically has all these other connotations.
Yeah.
And it automatically also influences the way people, it frames space in a way where it also influences the way that people experience and view the world and relate to each other and relate to the world. So there is this chain that follows from the design gesture, from the aesthetic expression of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel like it's not hidden like anywhere. It's like it existed like, you know, all the time, and it's still going on. We still need a roof. So maybe the academic discourse is hidden somewhere, but like the architecture itself is just, it's just there. It's just happening.
I think it's really interesting because we are all obsessed that architecture has to serve to something, and we are seeing architecture as a like this idea that we have been building and how academia has been teaching us to see it. But maybe we can see architecture in a different way, maybe not optimistic, but maybe more like what it is, like literally what architecture is at the end of the day, just a wall, a roof, or like simple language and form, rather than all these inherent things that we wanted to frame. And I think it fails to this false narrative that we are trying to sell, and we are trying to be the meaning of the design at the end. That maybe design is not about that.
I just push back on that because I think what we have discovered from time and time again, and I think in this moment part of the inability to divine where the field is going is because we no longer have a single universal vision of like what good design means, and I think this is because we remain in a postmodern moment where we had an extremely clear kind of point of reference perspective that design should be informed by ideas about kind of rational logic, a relation to an efficiency of how the body moves through space. Fundamentally, though, architecture can never just be a wall and a roof, because the decision of how a wall meets a roof and is placed in a site has all kinds of implications, which we have kind of uncovered. So I guess I'm hesitant to reduce architecture to just this technical exercise of drawing assemblies or something like that, and it is important to discover an ethos. I don't think it needs to be universal or singular, but I think having a personal clarity or a disciplinary clarity about what is animating our impulses shouldn't be let go.
But like, regarding to the ethos, and you're saying that like in modern times it was clear what we're doing, the paradigm, the, I don't know, rules. And now we're kind of more free and everyone's doing their own thing. But why does then like 90% of GSD's project look like steel, mesh on facade, curtain behind it, you know, like colorful furniture, colorful furniture. It's like basically all the projects. Well, sometimes it's even like hard to tell who did this.
Yeah.
Some people like have this like really idiosyncratic approach.
Yeah.
But most of the projects, and I don't think it's like necessarily bad. It's just the kind of fashion that's happening. But I don't know what is it like. What is driving us? Like, is it like a fashion? Is it a I don't know, more like an academic narrative? Is this?
I think it has to do also with this idea that architecture has to be like almost like an instrument for this kind of architecture, like an instrument that measures things.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like some of the discussion that we had with Beuys. Like, for example, I remember that in our project we had like this kind of like structures that would move around and whatever, and they were supposed to measure the wind or something like that. So of course you need like a lot of decisions to actually make this look like as a measuring machine.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like so much over rationalization of the thing to actually make it look like as if you had like everything sorted out, you know.
Yeah.
And then it becomes like this very, very precise machine that performs its job so well that it deserves to look like super shiny and like. So I think that's one of the things that I've seen so far.
Yeah, architecture becomes like, look like industrial, instrumental looking, just like adjusting to individual, right?
Yeah.
I think that speaks to the point that Dennis just made, though, which is that it's actually about signaling an idea of measuring and signaling an idea of operation, which ultimately we are divorced from or is becoming abstracted by the curtain or whatever. And to me, that is simultaneously signaling like a deep anxiety within us, like a knowledge that we should want these things, and individuation, that architecture's meaning is rendered through its like an alternative vision of it as a scientific instrument in which it's measuring, but it's not that.
Yeah.
It's instead this kind of like vague science symbol. And its aesthetics, I think, are a trend more than anything. But what is belying that trend is an idea that architecture needs to symbol a thing that it is not, like another thing.
Mm-hmm.
Technical instrument, rubric for sociality or something, I don't know.
The question of the vernacular is super interesting because in Ecuador we have this trend of trying to fit everything with this aesthetic way of understanding the vernacular and not actually what is true vernacular, which is, I mean, concrete blocks, you know, and stuff like that. And people don't buy wood because it's expensive and the industry is not there, you know. But I think that there's always this kind of like the idea that you say, like signaling something else. Yeah.
But what is quite concerning is that like architecture is always trying to be something else. like
Yeah.
as if it's not a thing itself.
Mhm.
Like if it's just a void, it's like covered by other things.
That is true.
Other things is in other disciplines or
Yeah,
material?
yeah, like an emerging into other disciplines or different like aesthetic categories that don't necessarily belong to architecture.
Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes I feel that it's more approaching to a kind of realism in a way, in some sort of sense. Realism in the way of just representing the real thing through something. But at the same time, I feel like I don't know. I don't have any like particular response to that, to be honest. I think that probably, if I'm only speaking to myself, I would say that architecture should like turn its eyes into silence and to actually understand how to not speak, but rather to create something and be generous with space. And that's it. I don't think there's any other ethos that, in my opinion, I'm able to pursue. It's just about silence and design. That's it.
For me, like history like repeats itself, and it's sort of like a mannerism moment we're going through. Like things are just being more exaggerated. It's just the chrome is chrome, like extreme chrome. Everyone's just putting chrome on everything, and it's the same thing that happened in mannerism. Like the column became a humongous column. The scale changed, and I don't know. I just feel like there's so many different. I don't think it's a name though. Like I don't think we're in like. I think we are in postmodernism still. But yeah, like different, like it just the last part of the postmodernism, the like how do you say, like vulgar sort of way. Although it looks kind of chic, like what we're doing here, I feel like it's very vulgar. I don't know.
I think to your point about exaggeration of parts, to me, the architecture of the present moment is about a proliferation of parts and a kind of like fussy assembly, which signals a lot of things, among which is like complexity. Complexity is important to the architectural idea that like we are doing something mystical, obfuscating, highly technical. And I think it's like looking at the kind of methods of assembly in our models speak to this. I think there's another more charitable read, which is like a climate reactionary component where parts is related to an idea of light touch, you know, which lends itself toward cables and poles and things like that. But I think there's a lot of questions about what it means to have so many parts to make a building. You know, it becomes so complex.
Related to your question of what constitutes architecture, on the one, I feel like there's so many categories to it, because on the one hand we have the architecture of the GSD and the institution of the formal, but on the other hand, where do all these other types of architecture fit? For example, architecture which is purely residential, serving core informalities, which still serve the built environment but don't necessarily fit within the urban plan or aren't necessarily executed by people who can call themselves architects even, but who still contribute to the built environment. So where does that fit? And also, yeah, architecture that doesn't respond to the trends but is more practical in its essence. Is that automatically inferior if its goal is not to fit within this narrative which we are designing here?
To me, the question of good architecture has a possibly equally vague answer, which is it's about like a comfortability that is possible in a thing. And ultimately, is the architecture, are you inhabiting the architecture, or is the architecture inhabiting your life? In the sense of like, are you being forced to work around the conditions that have been, you know, made possible by an architecture that is committed to maybe a set of architectural principles that are distinct from rhythms of living. And of course these things are deeply intertwined, but to me ultimately a good architecture is symbiotic but favors the user.
I was actually gonna say that I am very much irked by this idea of categorize architecture into one more label. I think that the big problem that the modernists brought to us is trying to generalize and put everything under the same category during the 50s and during the 60s, blah blah blah. And I think the fact that we're trying to like still put a large label onto what architecture practice is nowadays is extremely damaging to the practice, and I don't believe in labels essentially within architecture, and I don't think that there's good architecture or bad architecture. It's depending very much, as Galena had mentioned earlier, but like regarding its context and its situation.
Does no one disagree? Isn't there a thing like bad architecture?
I mean, I don't know. I think it's because of our training. So I believe it's because of our training that we can immediately tell that one space is better than the other. Is it more comfortable? Is it more appealing visually? Like, and just taking aside like whatever visual trend we have, like it's not crunk. It's not crunk. But when you step into a place and you feel comfortable, it's better than the other, and you can tell. I don't know if it's because of our training, but I think it's also culturally important. But anyways, you can tell. Even like let's say that in Ecuador we have like different communities which will have different sensibilities to space, but they will be able to tell whether something is better than the other thing, just based off on their sensibilities.
Maybe a question of, related to the question of, is there good architecture, is there universal architecture? Or if we think of architecture as a tool or a machine, can that tool be universalized, and should it be universalized? And where is the balance between something that can be multiplied and applied to different contexts and geographies, and then is still attuned to the local context and to those local intuitions and sensibilities of space?
I think this kind of like differences how you feel the space were a bit erased in the era of international architecture, because when I got here and I lived in the Gropius dorm, it's like the same dorm, the same spatial relationship with the dorm I had in Russia, which is like 1,000 kilometers away. And I don't even know like what's my like spatial sensibilities anymore, like what it could have been.
I remember something so funny that he said. You remember? He was telling us that his very fan had this thought all the time that good architecture always leaks.
Leaks. Yes.
That good architecture always leaks.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I mean,
what does that mean to you, though?
I mean, for me, like, just like thinking about it and actually like having experience building stuff, I know for a fact that when you try to push an idea so hard that it becomes like kind of like it gets into a conflict with reality, you need to solve some stuff in a very, very like rough way. Mm-hmm. Just because you push forward with the idea so much that it didn't allow reality to actually like get into the architecture and make it comfortable. So I feel like in a way it's just about like in Sversen's case, it's about how much he wanted to like push forward the detail and not being able to find that because he didn't want to settle for anything. Mm-hmm. And then the building leaks.
So good architecture is uncompromising in its attitude toward its like architectural provocation.
It's so old school, man.
That's so Louis, bro.
Yeah.
It's a Louis.
I don't know if good architecture should leak, but I do think old buildings probably leak. So that's fine.
I think bad architecture, I want to say what bad architecture is. I think bad architecture is the one that's like dominated by the ego of the architect. Like he doesn't care about who's gonna inhabit the space or what. He just wants to show some like object to the world. Like I don't know, Zaha Hadid for me is like that, for example. Not all her buildings, I like some of them, but it's like make an object like a giant jewelry in public space, and yeah, just out of scale.
Yeah, and also when you don't care what's around the building,
Exactly.
if you just think of it as an individual object that it just plays, then
and when you don't even think of like how to make things public in, I don't know, an urban context.
The architecture to decide if it's good or bad.
I think this is to Dennis's point, actually, though, which is that here, in theory, no, right?
I was thinking of scale, because I studied architecture in my undergrad, but then my experience of building things outside of school has been exhibition design and also building things on the scale of ephemeral architecture, which have been labeled as art. So then when something doesn't fit into and the
Capital A architecture.
Yeah, and the responsibility of it is different, and also the durability of it. Like, you're not building something which is supposed to last for decades or which is supposed to serve people for eternity.
I mean, I don't know. I've never built anything. You have. I've built things that are not built.
You have built something?
You built a very nice house.
Damn.
You haven't seen it?
You haven't seen it?
No.
No?
I've never
I thought
seen
you were
it.
joking.
No, I've never seen it.
Oh, sure.
Man, it's so
Bro,
good.
what the fuck?
Actually, I've never been to it, so maybe it's not.
It's not that good. It's actually, it leaks. So much.
So good.
Like,
So it's excellent.
yeah, it's really bad architecture, bro.